Hi, welcome. So in the last video, we looked at how to do basic operations in Jupyter notebooks as we installed Anaconda. So you can always go back to previous videos and install Anaconda. And in this video, we are going to look at variables and inputs in Python. There are times when you just don't want to be doing those calculations line by line, but you want to store some of those calculations inside a variable, which is like a bucket or a container that you can reuse later. So let's just go in and look at variables and inputs in Python. So here I've created a new Jupyter notebook. So if you haven't created it before, yours, just create and then join me. I've showed you in an earlier video how to create the Jupyter notebook. So we are just going to continue with our operations, and then we introduce you to variables and inputs. So this is absolute beginners in Python, remember. So we do our, like in the last video we looked at the plus, the minus, the division. So if we run this, we get 7. So that is okay. We could run this minus 5, 2 minus 5, we run it, we get minus 3. So but there are times when we would want to store these values like in a variable. So a variable will just be a container, so that we just need to call those variable and then we are able to do this operation. So this is the theory of a variable, is that we can say, for example, a is equals to 2 and then b is equal to 5, so that when next we are going to do the 2 plus 5, we don't necessarily need to do 2 plus 5 all the time, 2 minus 5 all the time. We can just do an a plus b or a minus b. So when you do it like this and you run it, you get no output because you aren't printing anything. But then what Python does is it stores this 2 in this a variable. So each time you call a, like a here, then you run it, it tells you a is equal to 2. If you call b and run it, you see that b is equal to 5. So instead of doing now the 2 plus 5 like you did before, you can now use variables that you've defined to be able to say a plus b. Here I'm going to press shift enter, that's a shortcut, shift enter, then I get 7. And then I can press a minus b, shift enter again, or you click on the run here if you are more comfortable here. But with shift enter, I get minus 3. So which means now I can go on with my calculations. If I wanted to do maybe a times b, then I do shift enter, I get a 10. I wanted to do maybe a divided by b, shift enter, I get 0.4. So it is easy now with the variable. I just call the variable as it's defined here, and then I'm able to run it here. So what if I wanted to change this variable, let's say from 2 to 4, for example? So since Python runs in a procedural form, so it goes like this from top to bottom. So if I come down here and then I say a equals to 4, so when I run it, it is going to update the value of a to the latest value. So before, a here was 2. After doing all these calculations, Python still knows that a is 2. It keeps a as 2 until it reaches this step. Is going to say, okay, now from now onwards, a is equals to 4. So if I run a here and I print it, a is now 4. So which means if I do a plus b now, I will get now instead 9, whereas here I was getting 7 because a is now 4 and b is equal to 5. So I could as well change b to any value, and then I do the same thing to add here. So you can decide to store different values inside a variable, different types of values. It must not only be numbers, it can be strings, it can be integers, it can be booleans, it can be floats. So let's just look at examples. So we've seen, for example, a is equals to 2. So this is an example of a number. So this is an example of a number. And as we are going to see when we start doing the different data structures, if I run the type here, it is an integer, and an integer is one example of a number. So we can also say b equals to 7.56. We run it. It can store this as a float. So if I run the type, I'm just going to copy and paste here of b, which we are going to see when we start looking at strings, numbers, lists. It's a float, but it's still an example of a number. So a variable could as well be, I'm feeling maybe happy. So this one is like a string. So if I run it, it's going to be the type here of the feeling. If I run it, it's a string. So each time I call feeling, I ask the variable, what do you contain? It says it contains happy. So it could be sad here. And then as soon as I do that, I initialize it again, I run it again. Okay, it takes the new, and then now it's sad. So I could also be a Boolean. So this is another type again of data. So Boolean is true or false. So I could say true here. And then when I run it, so if I get the type of is Boolean here, so remember to spell it right so that you get the exact thing there. And then if I do my shift enter again, shift enter, tells me this is a Boolean type of value. And then it could also be false. So I could say is old equals to false. So I put it like this, so Python knows that, okay, this is a Boolean. So if I run it, it's still a Boolean. So the Boolean can be true or false. So if I do is old here, it's old here, then I run it, I get a Boolean still. So the variables have just been used to store the values, and then you can reuse them to do other things. So I could decide that maybe there's a variable c which is equal to a plus b. So if I run this, so a variable can contain other variables, and if I call the c now, c is the 9.55 because a was this, this is b, and then a was 2. So this is actually c here. And then you can even use c to do other operations. So c plus b, c plus d, c plus a. So the whole concept of variables is just storing your values into a container or something like that, and a vessel or whatever, that you can always call the name of that vessel, and then it's going to tell you the contents of what is inside the container, for example. So now let us move on. So we are going to now just introduce you to inputs. So if I change this to a markdown, I can type a subtitle. Remember, you can just review your markdown. I can type a subtitle to inputs function. So we want to see, we've been getting data. How can we input data to Python? So now, for example, you can have a name. So let's just say, if you tell somebody, here's a variable, a name. So you can say input, and then you say, please enter your name. Let me just type this. Please enter your name, for example. Then we can just leave a space because we know they want a space here. So if I run this, it's going to ask me, please enter your name here. So it prompts me to give an input, and I can say name is Cyril. Then when I press enter, it notes that, okay, I have entered Cyril, And now the variable, the value, when I call name and I run it, I get serial. So I could still run this again, this function. So I say, instead I tell it, I say Bob. Then when I run it, when I press enter and then I call the name and then I run it, I get it now as Bob. So you can use inputs to store values into your variables, and you are the one who decides what you want to give the value of the variable by prompting the user. So you ask the user, can you please tell me your name? Can you please give me your name? And I'm going to enter it here. So input function will help you to get inputs from the user, and you can store it in a variable just like this. So I hope you've been able to learn how to use variables to store values, and you can call the name of the variable and it's going to give you the value it is containing, as well as you've learned how to use inputs to prompt a user to provide you certain details, and then you can store them as well in a variable. So see you next video. Wish you good data luck.